Sometimes fate doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes it quietly sits across the room, waiting for you to notice. Ethan Sterling had spent most of his 36 years believing that every meaningful thing in life could be earned, negotiated, or purchased. As the founder and CEO of Sterling Capital, his calendar was measured in billion-dollar acquisitions, private flights, and board meetings that stretched longer than sunsets he never stopped to watch. His penthouse overlooked Manhattan from nearly 90 stories above the streets. Yet the higher he climbed, the smaller the world beneath him seemed to become. Every morning followed the same carefully engineered rhythm. A personal trainer arrived before sunrise. Emails were answered before breakfast. Meetings filled every available minute until late evening. His assistants handled birthdays. His attorneys handled problems. His accountants handled numbers that no longer felt real. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had quietly handed every corner of his life to someone else, leaving himself with nothing but success. On the opposite side of the city, Emma Carter measured her mornings differently. She woke before dawn inside a modest apartment she shared with her grandmother, carefully brewed coffee in an old ceramic pot that had survived decades of family breakfasts, and walked 6 blocks to Harbor Lights Cafe before the streets became crowded. She liked arriving early because the restaurant belonged to silence for those few precious minutes. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. Sunlight slowly painted golden lines across polished wooden tables. She always believed that people deserved to begin their day with kindness, even if it came in the form of a warm smile and a perfectly poured cup of coffee. Most customers never remembered her name. She remembered theirs anyway. She remembered who preferred oat milk instead of cream, who always forgot an umbrella when rain was coming, who quietly celebrated anniversaries without saying a word, and who needed someone to ask how their day was going. It never felt like work to her. It felt like proof that ordinary moments mattered. That Wednesday began like every other Wednesday until an unexpected summer storm rolled across the city just after lunchtime. Dark clouds swallowed the skyline within minutes. Office workers rushed beneath awnings while taxis disappeared beneath sheets of rain. Ethan's driver became trapped several blocks away by flooded traffic, forcing him to leave an investment conference on foot. His tailored navy suit, worth more than most monthly rents, quickly surrendered to the weather. Rain soaked his jacket. Wind tugged at his tie. For the first time in months, nobody recognized the famous billionaire moving through crowded sidewalks because everyone was too busy escaping the storm themselves. Harbor Lights Cafe was the first place he saw with lights still glowing warmly through fogged windows. He stepped inside carrying little more than exhaustion hidden beneath quiet confidence. The gentle ringing of the entrance bell caused Emma to look up from wiping the front counter. She noticed the soaked businessman immediately, though not because of his expensive watch or polished shoes. She noticed the expression in his eyes. It was the unmistakable look of someone carrying a weight too heavy to explain. Without asking who he was, she reached beneath the counter, picked up the cafe's last dry umbrella that customers borrowed during storms, and offered it with an easy smile. "You'll probably need this when the rain starts again," she said. Ethan blinked in quiet surprise. "What if someone else needs it?" Emma shrugged softly. "Then I'll figure something out. That's tomorrow's problem." No one had spoken to him like that in years. There were no rehearsed compliments, no nervous excitement, no attempt to impress him. She didn't recognize one of the wealthiest men in America. She simply saw another person caught in the rain. Ethan accepted the umbrella almost reluctantly, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside him. It wasn't gratitude alone. It was curiosity. As thunder rolled gently outside and customers continued chatting over warm meals, neither Ethan Sterling nor Emma Carter realized that the smallest act of kindness inside an ordinary neighborhood cafe had quietly changed the direction of both their lives forever. The borrowed umbrella sat neatly beside Ethan Sterling's office door the following morning, unopened and completely dry. His driver had insisted on walking him beneath a covered entrance after the rain eased, making the umbrella unnecessary, yet Ethan could not bring himself to leave it with the receptionist or ask an assistant to return it. Throughout the day, his attention drifted toward the simple black umbrella far more often than it wandered toward the financial reports stacked across his desk. During a merger presentation worth hundreds of millions of dollars, He unexpectedly found himself remembering the easy smile of a waitress who had offered her only umbrella to a stranger without asking for anything in return. The memory refused to leave him. His executive assistant, Caroline, noticed the distraction immediately. She had worked beside Ethan for nearly 8 years and could read the smallest changes in his routine. When he declined his usual catered lunch and canceled an afternoon interview with a business magazine, she raised an eyebrow but wisely chose not to ask questions. Ethan rarely explained personal decisions because, in truth, he hardly ever made personal decisions. Every hour of his life had become another appointment on a calendar controlled by efficiency rather than desire. Meanwhile, Harbor Lights Cafe welcomed another busy morning. Emma moved effortlessly between tables carrying steaming mugs, fresh pastries, and cheerful conversations that somehow made rushed commuters slow down for a moment. Her manager often joked that customers returned for Emma more than they returned for the coffee. She laughed every time he said it because she believed kindness should never be treated as a business strategy. It was simply the right way to greet another human being. During her afternoon break, Emma called her grandmother, who reminded her to stop by the neighborhood grocery store after work because they were running low on flour and fresh fruit. They laughed together over a recipe that had failed the night before, and Emma promised to try again over the weekend. Their life was simple, carefully budgeted, and occasionally uncertain. But their apartment was always filled with conversation, homemade meals, and genuine affection. Those things mattered more to Emma than expensive possessions ever could. Shortly after noon, the familiar bell above the cafe door chimed again. Emma glanced toward the entrance and froze for the briefest moment. The businessman from yesterday had returned. This time his suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes reflected the polished floor, and the quiet confidence he carried seemed more natural beneath clear skies than it had during the storm. He chose the same small table near the window instead of one of the larger booths that better suited someone conducting business. Emma approached with her notebook and smiled politely. "Welcome back. Coffee?" Ethan nodded almost sheepishly. "Black. No sugar." She laughed softly. "I remembered." The word surprised them both. Ethan was accustomed to people remembering his title, his company, or his public reputation. Emma remembered only his coffee order. As she walked toward the counter, he watched the easy rhythm of the cafe unfold around her. She greeted elderly regulars by name, knelt briefly to hand crayons to a little boy waiting for pancakes, and quietly replaced a cracked mug before a customer even noticed it. None of those actions were dramatic. None would ever appear in a newspaper. Yet each small kindness seemed more valuable than many charitable galas Ethan had attended over the years. When Emma returned with his coffee, she placed the umbrella gently on the table beside his cup. "I almost forgot," Ethan said. "Thank you for trusting me with this." Emma looked at it and smiled. "I never really thought about trusting you. It just seemed like you needed it more than I did." Ethan stared at her for a moment, unsure how to answer. In boardrooms, every sentence carried strategy. Every conversation hid negotiation. Here, honesty arrived without calculation. Before he could think of another response, an elderly customer accidentally dropped several grocery bags near the entrance. Apples rolled across the floor in every direction. Emma immediately hurried over, and without hesitation Ethan rose from his chair to help gather them. They worked side by side for only a minute, exchanging quiet smiles instead of formal introductions. Neither realized that every ordinary moment they shared was slowly dismantling walls they had spent years building around their hearts. Over the next 2 weeks, Harbor Lights Cafe quietly became part of Ethan Sterling's schedule in a way that no calendar invitation ever had. Every weekday, usually a few minutes after 8 in the morning, he stepped through the familiar front door, greeted by the gentle ringing of the brass bell and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries. His executives assumed he had discovered a convenient place to work between meetings. His security team assumed he preferred the neighborhood because it attracted little attention. None of them guessed the real reason. Ethan returned because, for the first time in years, there was one place where nobody expected him to be extraordinary. Emma noticed the pattern long before she mentioned it. On Monday, he ordered black coffee and toasted sourdough. On Tuesday, he added blueberry muffins for the office. By Thursday, she no longer needed to write down his order. She simply smiled when he walked in and said, "The usual?" Ethan would nod with a quiet grin that seemed to grow a little more genuine each day. Their conversations remained brief at first, never longer than a minute or two, but each exchange peeled away another layer of unfamiliarity. Emma learned that Ethan preferred early mornings because the city felt more honest before rush hour. Ethan learned that Emma loved old bookstores, homemade cinnamon rolls, and long walks through Central Park whenever she had a free afternoon. Neither one realized how carefully they were collecting small details about the other. One Friday morning, Ethan arrived carrying a thick novel instead of his laptop. Emma laughed the moment she spotted it. "I was beginning to think you only read financial reports." Ethan glanced at the book in his hands and smiled. "Someone once told me ordinary moments matter. I thought I should start creating a few." Emma tilted her head, pretending to think. "That sounds surprisingly wise. I borrowed the idea," Ethan admitted. She smiled without realizing how deeply those words reached him. Around them, the cafe buzzed with its usual rhythm. Students hurried through breakfast before classes. Construction workers joked over stacks of pancakes. Retired neighbors lingered over endless cups of coffee while debating baseball scores and neighborhood news. Ethan watched the scene with growing fascination. Inside his office, every conversation revolved around growth charts, quarterly earnings, or strategic expansion. Here, people celebrated birthdays with slices of pie, comforted friends after difficult weeks, and laughed loudly enough that strangers often smiled without knowing the joke. The simplicity felt strangely luxurious. One afternoon, after finishing her shift, Emma stepped outside carrying 2 bags of groceries. Before she could start the 6-block walk home, the paper handle snapped, sending oranges rolling across the sidewalk. Ethan happened to be leaving a nearby meeting when he recognized her kneeling beside the scattered fruit. Without hesitation, he crossed the street and helped gather everything before passing her the last orange with a playful smile. "It seems we keep meeting while picking things up from the ground," he said. Emma laughed. "Maybe the universe thinks we both need practice." They walked together for several blocks, moving at an easy pace. Neither of them felt any need to hurry. Emma pointed toward a small family-owned bakery that had been operating for nearly 70 years and insisted they made the best apple pie in Manhattan. Ethan confessed that despite living in New York for more than a decade, he had never visited because he rarely explored neighborhoods outside business districts. Emma looked genuinely surprised. "Then you have missed half the city." Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after they parted ways. That evening, instead of attending another networking dinner, he wandered through streets he had never bothered to notice before. He stopped to watch children chasing bubbles in a neighborhood park, listened to a saxophone player performing beneath an old subway bridge, and bought a slice of apple pie from the bakery Emma had recommended. Sitting alone on a bench as the sun dipped behind rows of brownstone buildings, Ethan realized something that unsettled him in the gentlest possible way. He had spent years building a remarkable life without ever truly learning how to live it. And somehow, without trying to change him, Emma Carter was quietly showing him everything he had been missing. By the beginning of the 3rd week, Ethan Sterling found himself looking forward to mornings in a way that surprised even him. Harbor Lights Cafe had quietly become the only place where his thoughts slowed down enough for him to hear them. The endless stream of emails, conference calls, and investment proposals still filled every hour after breakfast. But now there was always one peaceful moment before the chaos began. Emma greeted him with the same warm smile whether he arrived wearing an expensive tailored suit or a simple navy sweater. On the rare mornings he left the office later than usual. She never treated him differently because of appearances, and Ethan gradually realized how unusual that was. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan entered the cafe expecting the familiar weekend crowd, only to find Emma arranging fresh flowers in small glass jars for each table before opening. She glanced up and laughed softly. "You are early. We are still getting ready." Ethan looked around at the quiet dining room. "I do not mind waiting." Emma handed him a steaming mug before he even placed an order. "This one is on the house. Consider it payment for helping rescue my groceries the other day." Ethan accepted the cup with genuine gratitude. "Then I owe you another favor." Emma smiled. "You really do not keep score, do you?" Ethan paused before answering. "Actually, I always have. Business teaches you to measure everything. Profit, loss, time, risk, return. I suppose I forgot that not everything valuable belongs on a spreadsheet." Emma rested a stack of menus on the counter and looked at him thoughtfully. My grandmother always says the best things in life cannot be counted because they are meant to be felt. Her words lingered between them long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, Emma invited Ethan to walk through the neighborhood farmer's market because her grandmother needed fresh vegetables for Sunday dinner. Ethan hesitated for only a second before agreeing, surprising himself once again. They wandered between colorful produce stands, local artists displaying handmade crafts, and musicians filling the sidewalks with cheerful melodies. Nobody recognized Ethan as one of the country's most influential business leaders. He carried a reusable shopping bag while Emma compared tomatoes with the seriousness of an expert chef. At one stand, an elderly vendor greeted Emma by name and quietly slipped an extra bunch of fresh herbs into her bag. "For your grandmother," he said with a smile. Emma thanked him warmly before introducing Ethan simply as a friend. The single word echoed inside him more powerfully than any formal title he had ever received. As they continued walking, Ethan noticed how naturally Emma belonged wherever she went. Children waved to her from a nearby ice cream shop. A florist asked about her grandmother's health. A retired teacher stopped to recommend a new mystery novel she thought Emma would enjoy. Every conversation was brief, sincere, and filled with mutual respect. Ethan suddenly understood that influence did not always come from wealth. Sometimes it was built one kind interaction at a time over many years. When they reached her apartment building, Emma invited him upstairs for a slice of homemade apple pie her grandmother had baked that morning. The apartment was modest but welcoming, filled with family photographs, crocheted blankets, and the comforting aroma of cinnamon. Margaret Carter greeted Ethan with a smile that immediately put him at ease. She asked about his work without the slightest hint of curiosity about his financial success. Instead, she wanted to know whether he enjoyed reading, whether he had siblings, and whether he remembered to take breaks from work. Ethan answered each question honestly, realizing that no one had asked him such simple personal questions in a very long time. Before he left, Margaret handed him 2 slices of pie wrapped carefully for later. "Everyone deserves something sweet at the end of a long day," she said. Driving home through the glowing streets of Manhattan, Ethan glanced at the neatly wrapped pie resting on the passenger seat. His luxurious penthouse would still be quiet when he arrived. The city skyline would still sparkle beneath his windows. His calendar would still be full before sunrise. Yet something inside him had shifted. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering not how to build a bigger company or close another remarkable deal, but how a small apartment filled with laughter, homemade desserts, and genuine kindness somehow felt richer than every success he had spent his life chasing. The following Monday began with an unusual silence inside Harbor Lights Cafe. Emma noticed it the moment she unlocked the front door. The cheerful conversations that usually filled the kitchen before sunrise had been replaced by whispered discussions between the manager and the owner. Receipts, invoices, and folders covered one of the dining tables instead of freshly baked pastries. Even before anyone explained the situation, she sensed something was wrong. By the time the morning rush slowed, the owner gathered the small staff together with a tired smile that could not quite hide his concern. Rising food costs, increasing rent, and several months of declining revenue had pushed the neighborhood cafe into a difficult position. Unless business improved within the next few weeks, difficult decisions would have to be made. No one spoke for several long seconds. Harbor Lights was more than a workplace. For many employees, it was a second family. Emma glanced around the room and saw worried expressions on every familiar face. She quietly promised herself that whatever happened, she would do everything possible to help. Later that morning, Ethan arrived as usual, immediately noticing that the warm atmosphere felt different. Emma greeted him with the same friendly smile, but something behind her eyes seemed unusually heavy. After bringing his coffee, she excused herself to help another table, yet Ethan continued watching the staff move through the dining room with quiet concern. When Emma finally returned to refill his cup, he gently asked, "Is everything all right?" She hesitated for a moment before answering honestly, "We are trying to stay positive. Business has been slower than expected this year." She smiled again, determined not to dwell on the problem. "People still need coffee, so we will keep making the best coffee we can." Ethan admired the optimism in her voice, but he also recognized the uncertainty she was trying to hide. Throughout the afternoon, the conversation lingered in his thoughts. Back at Sterling Capital, executives debated the acquisition of another successful company, while financial analysts projected record profits for the next quarter. Normally, Ethan would have led every discussion with complete focus. Instead, he found himself wondering how many small businesses quietly disappeared each year, not because they lacked heart or loyal customers, but simply because circumstances changed faster than they could adapt. That evening, he reviewed Harbor Light's cafe online, discovering hundreds of heartfelt customer reviews praising its welcoming atmosphere, homemade recipes, and exceptional service. It deserved better than becoming another empty storefront. The next morning, Ethan returned with an idea forming in his mind. After breakfast, he waited until Emma had a free moment. "Would your owner ever consider speaking with someone about improving the business?" he asked carefully. Emma looked curious. "Maybe." "What?" Ethan chose his words with caution. "I know people who specialize in helping neighborhood businesses modernize without losing what makes them special." Emma's grateful smile appeared almost immediately before fading just as quickly. "That is thoughtful, but I do not think they would accept charity." Ethan shook his head. "Neither would I expect them to." She studied his expression for a long moment, then quietly replied, "I appreciate that more than you know. But this place has survived for decades because people here believe in earning every success together. If we make it through this, I want it to be because the community stood beside us, not because someone rescued us." Her answer caught Ethan completely off guard. In his world, problems were solved with larger investments, faster decisions, and greater resources. Emma saw the situation differently. To her, preserving dignity mattered just as much as preserving the business itself. He respected that far more than she realized. Over the following days, Ethan resisted every instinct telling him to quietly write a check or purchase the building outright. Instead, he listened. He watched customers interact with the staff, observed what made Harbor Lights unique, and began thinking not like a billionaire investor, but like someone trying to protect a place that had quietly become important to him. For the first time in his professional life, success no longer meant owning something. It meant giving it a chance to thrive without changing its soul. As he stepped outside after another peaceful breakfast, his phone rang with news that a nationally recognized restaurant chain had begun searching for new locations in the neighborhood. Ethan looked back through the cafe window at Emma laughing with a young customer, and a quiet feeling settled in his chest. He suddenly realized that the greatest challenge ahead might not be convincing Harbor Lights to survive. It might be protecting everything that made it worth saving before someone else saw its value first. The news about the restaurant chain spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone expected. Within days, conversations inside Harbor Lights Cafe quietly shifted from weekend plans and favorite desserts to rising rents and changing streets. Longtime customers worried that another familiar local business might disappear, replaced by a polished storefront that looked impressive but felt anonymous. Emma listened patiently as regulars shared their concerns, offering encouraging words even though uncertainty lingered in her own heart. She believed hope was most important when people had the least reason to hold on to it. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself facing an entirely different kind of pressure. During a Monday morning strategy meeting, one of Sterling Capital's senior executives presented an investment opportunity that immediately caught everyone's attention. The same restaurant chain planning to expand into the neighborhood was seeking financial partners for an ambitious nationwide growth project. Several board members praised the proposal, calling it a safe investment with predictable returns. Charts projected impressive profits. Analysts highlighted market trends. Under ordinary circumstances, Ethan would have approved the recommendation within minutes. Instead, he remained unusually quiet. His colleagues exchanged curious glances as he studied the presentation without offering his opinion. After the meeting ended, Caroline approached him carefully. "You have been distracted lately," she said gently. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I am finally paying attention." Later that afternoon, he walked several extra blocks before reaching Harbor Lights. Instead of going inside immediately, he stood across the street watching customers enter and leave. A father held the door open for an elderly woman. Two college students laughed over shared homework. A delivery driver waved at Emma through the front window before continuing down the block. The cafe was not simply selling coffee. It was quietly holding an entire community together, one ordinary moment at a time. When Ethan stepped inside, Emma greeted him with the same warmth as always, but she noticed the thoughtful expression on his face. "Long day?" she asked while placing his coffee on the table. Ethan nodded. "Long decisions." Emma smiled knowingly. "My grandmother says the hardest choices usually have nothing to do with money." Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity. Was she always this wise? Emma laughed softly. "She says she only became wise after making enough mistakes." Before Ethan could respond, the owner joined them carrying a small cardboard box. "Would you mind helping us?" he asked with an apologetic smile. "We are organizing donations for the neighborhood food pantry this weekend." Without hesitation, Ethan rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt and spent the next hour helping employees sort canned goods, pasta, cereal, and other donated supplies into neat packages. None of the volunteers recognized his name. They simply thanked him for showing up. The work itself was simple, yet Ethan found unexpected satisfaction in every completed box. At one point, a young boy helping his mother stack donations looked up at Ethan and asked, "Do you work here too?" Ethan smiled. "Not exactly." The boy grinned. "You should. Everybody here seems happy." The innocent remark settled deeply in Ethan's mind. Happiness had never appeared on any quarterly report, yet somehow this small cafe produced more of it every day than many successful corporations ever managed. As evening approached, the volunteers gathered outside for a group photograph before delivering the donations. Emma stood beside Ethan without thinking twice about it. The owner thanked everyone for giving up part of their Saturday to help neighbors they might never meet. While others chatted nearby, Emma quietly looked toward the glowing windows of the cafe. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "I hope this place never loses what makes it special." Ethan followed her gaze. "What do you think that is?" She answered without hesitation. "People who choose kindness before convenience." Those words stayed with Ethan long after he returned home. Late that night, he opened the investment proposal for the restaurant chain once again. The numbers were still impressive. The projected profits had not changed. Yet something else had. For the first time in his career, he realized that the best investment was not always the one promising the highest financial return. Sometimes the greatest value could only be measured by the lives quietly touched every single day. Closing the report without signing his approval, Ethan reached for his phone and made one unexpected call to Caroline. "Please arrange a meeting tomorrow," he said calmly. "Not with the restaurant chain. I want every publicly available detail about Harbor Lights Cafe, its history, its neighborhood, and its future. Before anyone decides what this community needs, I want to understand what it already has." The report Caroline placed on Ethan Sterling's desk the following morning contained everything he had requested about Harbor Lights Cafe, yet it was the final page that held his attention the longest. After decades of serving the neighborhood, the building's lease would expire in less than 4 months. The property owner had already begun discussions with several commercial developers, including representatives connected to the same restaurant chain Sterling Capital had been invited to support. Ethan closed the folder slowly. For years, he had built his reputation by identifying valuable opportunities before anyone else recognized them. This time, however, the opportunity did not feel like a victory. It felt like a countdown. Instead of heading directly into another executive meeting, Ethan instructed his driver to take him across the city. Harbor Lights was already busy when he arrived, and Emma greeted him with her usual smile, although he noticed a trace of exhaustion behind her bright eyes. She had been working extra shifts while the owner searched for ways to reduce expenses without cutting staff hours. Even so, she welcomed every customer with the same warmth that had first caught Ethan's attention weeks earlier. After serving his breakfast, she finally sat across from him during a brief break. "You look like someone carrying a secret," she said with a playful smile. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Maybe I am carrying a decision." Emma stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Sometimes decisions become easier when you remember who will be affected instead of what will be gained." Ethan looked at her carefully. She had no idea how perfectly her words described the choice before him. Before he could respond, the cafe owner called Emma to help with a large group that had just arrived, ending the conversation almost as quickly as it had begun. Ethan remained seated, quietly observing the dining room. Every table seemed to tell a different story. A retired couple celebrated their wedding anniversary with slices of homemade pie. 2 nurses shared breakfast after finishing an overnight hospital shift. A young father patiently helped his daughter color pictures while waiting for pancakes. Harbor Lights had become part of countless ordinary memories, the kind people rarely noticed until they were gone. That afternoon, Ethan attended the long-awaited board meeting regarding the restaurant chain investment. The presentation was polished, optimistic, and financially persuasive. Every projection pointed toward substantial growth. When the chairman finally asked for Ethan's recommendation, the room fell silent. He looked around the conference table before speaking calmly. I am withdrawing sterling capital from this investment opportunity. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. One director leaned forward. May we ask why? Ethan answered without raising his voice. Because not every profitable investment creates lasting value. Sometimes growth should strengthen communities rather than replace them. The room remained quiet. Some members looked confused. Others appeared disappointed. But no one challenged the decision. They had learned long ago that Ethan never changed course without careful thought. Late that evening, Ethan returned to Harbor Lights just before closing. Emma was wiping the last table while soft music drifted through the nearly empty cafe. She smiled when she saw him. You missed breakfast today? Ethan nodded. I had an important meeting. Did it go well? She asked. Ethan looked around the familiar room before answering. I think I finally made the right decision, even if not everyone agrees. Emma smiled warmly. Those are usually the decisions worth making. As they stepped outside together, cool evening air filled the quiet street. Storefront lights reflected softly against the sidewalks while neighbors carried groceries home after another ordinary day. Ethan walked beside Emma in comfortable silence until they reached the corner where their paths usually separated. Just before saying goodnight, Emma turned toward him. You know, she said gently, when you first walked into the cafe during that storm, I thought you looked like someone who had everything except peace. Ethan smiled with quiet honesty. And what do I look like now? Emma considered the question for a moment before answering, like someone beginning to understand where peace actually comes from. Ethan watched her disappear down the sidewalk before looking back toward the glowing windows of Harbor Lights. For the first time in years, he realized that success was no longer the destination. Guiding his future, protecting the people and places that had quietly changed his heart had become far more important. What he did not yet know was that the greatest challenge still lay ahead, because by the following morning, a surprising announcement from the building's owner would threaten to change everything they had worked so hard to preserve. The announcement arrived just before the breakfast rush. The owner of Harbor Lights gathered the staff with a mixture of gratitude and concern written across his face. After weeks of negotiations, the building owner had officially accepted an offer from a commercial developer. Unless something unexpected happened, the cafe would have 90 days before the lease ended permanently. No one spoke. The familiar dining room suddenly felt quieter than anyone could remember. Emma looked around at the people who had become her second family. Some lowered their eyes. Others forced hopeful smiles for one another. The owner took a deep breath before speaking again. I want every one of you to know this has never been about your work. You gave this place your hearts every single day. Emma reached over and gently squeezed the hand of one of the younger servers who had started only 6 months earlier. We are not finished yet, she whispered. Not until the last cup of coffee is served. Later that morning, Ethan walked through the front door and immediately sensed the difference. Conversations were quieter. The usual laughter behind the counter had faded into determined silence. Emma still welcomed him with a warm smile, but he could see the disappointment she was trying so hard to hide. After serving his coffee, she sat across from him for only a minute before returning to work. The news finally became official, she said softly. We have 3 months. Ethan nodded slowly. I heard. Emma looked out the front window toward the busy sidewalk. I know places cannot last forever. I just hope this one had a little more time. Ethan wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to explain that he had already begun exploring every legal and financial option available. He wanted to promise that he would not let Harbor Lights disappear, without exhausting every possibility. But he also remembered what Emma had taught him from the very beginning. Real kindness respected another person's dignity. Empty promises offered comfort for only a moment. Quiet actions lasted much longer. That afternoon, Ethan asked Caroline to arrange a private meeting with the building owner. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. By the time it ended, Ethan understood the full situation. The owner of the property was preparing for retirement and believed selling to a large developer would provide financial security for his family. Ethan respected that decision. He also realized the issue was no longer simply about money. It was about creating another path that honored everyone involved. Over the following week, Ethan worked quietly behind the scenes without telling Emma. Instead of attempting to purchase the building outright, he assembled a proposal unlike any his company had ever created. It combined private investment, historic neighborhood preservation incentives, and partnerships with local business organizations. Rather than replacing Harbor Lights, the plan would strengthen the entire block by supporting several independent businesses together. It was financially responsible while protecting the character of the community. Caroline reviewed the presentation and smiled. This may be the most unusual proposal Sterling Capital has ever submitted. Ethan looked toward the city skyline beyond his office window. It might also become the most important. While Ethan worked, Emma focused on what she could control. She organized neighborhood appreciation events, invited local musicians to perform on weekends, and encouraged longtime customers to share memories of Harbor Lights on a community bulletin board near the entrance. Soon the wall filled with handwritten notes, family photographs, children's drawings, and stories spanning generations. One elderly couple pinned a faded picture taken inside the cafe on their first date more than 40 years earlier. A firefighter wrote that the staff had quietly prepared hot breakfast for his entire crew after exhausting overnight shifts during severe winter storms. A college graduate thanked the cafe for giving her a part-time job that helped pay tuition. Every story reminded Emma that the value of Harbor Lights had never been measured by its balance sheet. It lived inside the lives it had touched. One evening, after helping close the cafe, Emma stood reading the growing collection of memories while Ethan quietly joined her. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Emma smiled through glistening eyes. "I thought we were just serving coffee." Ethan gently shook his head. "You were building a home that thousands of people carried with them long after they walked out the door." Emma looked at him with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for believing this place matters." Ethan met her eyes with complete honesty. "Harbor Lights matters because of the people inside it. And one of those people changed my life without ever trying." Before Emma could answer, the owner stepped out from his office holding an envelope that had just arrived by overnight delivery. It contained an invitation requesting a final meeting between all interested parties before the future of Harbor Lights would be decided, and for the first time in weeks, hope no longer felt impossible. The meeting took place on a bright Monday morning inside a modest conference room overlooking the same neighborhood that Harbor Lights Cafe had quietly served for generations. Around the table sat the building owner, the cafe owner, representatives from the commercial development company, local business leaders, and Ethan Sterling. Emma had no reason to attend, so she spent the morning serving coffee to regular customers, unaware that the future of the place she loved was being decided only a few blocks away. After everyone presented their offers, the developer outlined plans for a modern restaurant that promised higher rent, increased foot traffic, and impressive financial projections. When it was Ethan's turn, he stood without opening a single slide filled with complicated charts. Instead, he placed a small stack of handwritten notes collected from the cafe's community bulletin board onto the center of the table. He invited everyone to read them in silence. There were stories from teachers, firefighters, nurses, grandparents, college students, and families who had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and ordinary mornings inside Harbor Lights. Only after several quiet minutes did Ethan begin speaking. He explained that successful investments should never be measured by revenue alone. A neighborhood was strongest when local businesses, families, and communities grew together. His proposal guaranteed financial security for the building owner while preserving Harbor Lights through a long-term partnership supported by Sterling Capital, neighborhood preservation grants, and a local business development program designed to strengthen every independent storefront on the block. The room remained silent once again, but this time the silence felt different. It carried possibility instead of uncertainty. 2 days later, the agreement became official. Harbor Lights would remain exactly where it belonged. Renovations would improve the building without changing its familiar character, employees would keep their jobs, and neighboring businesses would receive support through the same community initiative. The announcement spread through the neighborhood faster than any advertisement ever could. Customers filled the cafe from opening until closing, celebrating not simply because a business had survived, but because a piece of their shared history had been protected. Emma learned the full story only after the papers had already been signed. When the owner explained everything, including Ethan's quiet work behind the scenes, she stood speechless. Every time he had seemed calm, every time he had avoided making promises, he had actually been searching for a solution that respected everyone involved. That evening, after the last customer had gone home, Emma found Ethan waiting outside beneath the same street lamp where they had often said goodnight. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emma smiled with unmistakable warmth. "You could have solved everything with money weeks ago." Ethan nodded gently. "Maybe, but then I would have saved a building instead of honoring the people inside it." Emma looked at him with grateful eyes. "You listened." Ethan smiled. "You taught me how." The quiet street seemed to disappear around them. There were no photographers, no business reporters, no extravagant celebration. Only two people standing outside an ordinary neighborhood cafe that had quietly changed both of their lives. Ethan took a slow breath before speaking again. "I spent years believing success meant building something larger every year. Then I met someone who showed me that the most meaningful things are often the smallest moments we choose not to overlook. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know I would like to spend as many tomorrows as possible discovering those moments with you." Emma laughed softly through happy tears. "I was wondering how long it would take you to say that." She reached for his hand, and this time neither of them let go. 1 year later, Harbor Lights Cafe welcomed customers into a beautifully restored building that looked almost exactly as it always had, except for one small framed photograph hanging near the entrance. It showed volunteers packing food donations together on a quiet Saturday afternoon, reminding everyone that kindness could change lives in ways no one expected. Ethan continued leading Sterling Capital, but his calendar now included breakfasts at Harbor Lights several mornings each week. Emma became the cafe's general manager, working alongside the same friends who had never stopped believing in their community. Margaret still baked apple pies every Sunday, and the neighborhood children still rushed inside after school for cookies and hot chocolate during the winter months. At the table beside the front window, where a weary businessman had once stepped in to escape the rain, two familiar cups of coffee rested side by side, proving that sometimes the greatest fortune a person could ever discover was not found in a bank account, but in the unexpected kindness of someone who simply offered an umbrella when it was needed most.